Well, joining us now is the former Justice Minister, Allan Rock. Allan Rock, nice to see you again.
Michael, it's nice to be here.
So, I think this practice of incarcerating refugees, many Canadians know this happens, many others do not. Just how commonplace is this practice?
Well, far too commonplace. The report published last year by Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International jointly documented over 10,000 cases of people being held in detention pending the determination of their legal status. So it's very widespread, and so many lives have been touched and, frankly, affected very deeply as a result of this practice.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to get into that in a moment, but talk to us about the kind of facilities that individuals are held in, and for how long are they held in these essentially jails?
Well, what happens is when you present at the border and the border agency asks for your legal status and they're not satisfied that you had the status to be in Canada, then you can be released until there's a hearing, or you can be detained. It's entirely in the discretion of the border agency, Michael. The Government of Canada has created 3 holding centers in Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia, which have about 370 beds total. They're like minimum security prisons. There's some supervision, but it's not as bad as being in jail. However, in too many cases, the border agency decides that instead of having you in a federal holding facility, they're going to use the agreement the federal government has with the provinces to hold you in a provincial jail. And the trouble with that is the agency has no power over the conditions in which you're kept in the jails. The jails in the provinces are created for people accused of or convicted of crime. In the case of immigration detention, there's no time limit as to how long you can be kept. So, for example, the report from Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International documented over 300 cases since 2016 of people held longer than a year in immigration detention. So if you're held for an indeterminate period in a provincial jail where you can be held in solitary confinement, you're locked up with people accused of or convicted of crime, what comes out of that is gross human rights violations, completely unjust practices.
And as you refer to off top there, real practical impacts, the type of trauma it inflicts on these individuals, which I think would shock many Canadians who see Canada as this place of refuge for people around the world. Talk to us about the kind of stories that you've heard about the effects this type of incarceration has.
Well, it's resulted in suicide attempts on the part of those who are locked up indefinitely in provincial jails, who committed no crime, accused of no crime, and feel hopeless, feel they don't know how or when they're ever going to be able to get out. And there have been cases where there have been suicide attempts. Indeed, there have been suicides. And there have been coroner's inquests looking into some of these deaths. But even for those who survive the experience, it often is a traumatizing period, which makes them fearful of authority in Canada, which makes them fearful of police because they don't know if they're going to be pulled over again and detained for no reason that they can understand. So the testimony of the people who've been through this awful experience is quite harrowing. Just today at the news conference, we had 2 individuals who experienced just that, who were thrown into provincial jails without understanding why, who were being kept for who knows how long. The man who spoke this morning said he spent 3 months in provincial jail in British Columbia without having any idea when he'd be able to leave. Mm-hmm. And yes, it does have a huge emotional and psychological impact on the people who endure it.
Are these security concerns that leads to the incarceration of these individuals, are those valid security concerns?
The 94% of the cases of people being detained by CBSA are on the grounds of flight risk, meaning we're worried that if we release you into the community, you won't turn up for your hearing to determine your legal status. So that's 88%, and a few other percentages come from CBSA not being completely satisfied with your documents. So hardly a security risk. These are people who pose no threat that can be demonstrated. And in fact, the odd thing, Michael, is that in March of 2020, when the pandemic hit, when the pandemic arrived, there were over 9,600 people detained for immigration purposes, either in provincial jails or holding centers. CBSA released all but 1,600 of them into the community because of the pandemic. Now, there's proof positive that you release, 8,000 people and the sky didn't fall. There were no reports of community endangerment, no public safety issues, no crime. So using flight risk as an excuse to detain someone, we say, is far too broad a discretion. It should be challenged. It should be supervised. The CBSA has among the strongest police powers of any public security agency in the country, and it's the only public security agency not subject to independent civilian oversight. And it's high time there be effective oversight on these decisions.
Now, the news conference that you took part in launches 12 days of action to try to raise the awareness about this issue with federal politicians. So what would you like to see happen instead of what's currently taking place?
4 of the 10 provinces have already ripped up the agreement with Ottawa, allowing Ottawa to use their provincial jails for immigration detention. What we ask the Government of Canada is, do we have to wait until the other provinces rip up the agreements? Or will Ottawa show leadership that's required, step out in front of this and say, we're going to end this practice right now? So what we want to see is the Government of Canada taking the leadership required to bring this practice to an end. It can do it progressively. It can ease into a new way of doing things, but it must end. And Michael, there are literally hundreds of community facilities across the country that are available to support and to look after people while they're awaiting their hearing. You don't have to put them in prison. Just commit them to a community agency which is available, have them stay in touch with that agency, have them then appear for their hearing when their hearing occurs. And I dare say the vast majority of people would attend those hearings. There are also technologies available now which permit the authorities to keep in touch with people while they're awaiting their hearing without them being detained.
Allan Rock, good to speak with you again. Thank you for being here.
Michael, thanks for the opportunity to talk about this important issue.